4 kilometers below the waves.
The biggest challenge was the depth.
At the bottom of the Atlantic, investigators search for the remains of Air France Flight 447.
This was a major commercial airline.
What the hell are you doing?
Had a plane suddenly drop out of the sky in 4.5 minutes.
228 people are gone.
It was a real shock.
We need to contact Brazil and Senegal air traffic control right away, please.
Air crash investigators face a monumental task.
We absolutely have to understand why this accident happened.
The easiest explanation is that the bomb blew it out of the sky. That would explain it.
The answers may lie in the wreckage, but finding that evidence
Stop there.
will take years.
They had to do whatever it took.
Air France Flight 447 is crossing the Atlantic Ocean. The Airbus A330 is flying an 11-hour direct route from Rio de Janeiro to Paris. 58-year-old Captain Marc Dubois is in command.
Here's the new forecast.
He's been a pilot for well over half his life and is now one of the most senior captains at Air France.
It's hard to see anything in this plane with this lighting.
First Officer Pierre-Cédric Bonin is 32 years old. He's been flying the A330 for about a year.
We are arriving at Intol.
37-year-old relief pilot David Robert is on standby. The 3 pilots fly in shifts to stay alert. There are 216 passengers on the overnight flight, including Canadian business executive Brad Clemes.
I talked to my brother on the Sunday morning, and we talked about our children, and then I talked to him right up to the time that he got onto the plane. Like so many of these air warriors, or whatever they call them, he flew all the time. He was quite used to it, and I think he probably even enjoyed it.
With the autopilot holding the plane steady at 35,000 feet,
Air France 447.
Air France 447, go ahead.
the crew communicates with Brazilian air traffic control.
Air France 447, contact the Atlantic Center.
As they fly, an onboard computer monitors the engines, hydraulics, and other systems. It also sends progress reports to Air France headquarters. Every 10 minutes, the computer transmits the plane's position, along with any maintenance data.
The goal of the maintenance messages is simply to help the ground teams prepare for any repairs to the plane that are needed for the next departure.
Atlantico, Atlantico. Air France 447, calling Atlantico. Air France 447, Atlantico, go ahead.
3 hours into the flight, the captain reports reaching a navigational waypoint off the coast of Brazil.
Air France 447, position in tow.
Maintain flight level 350.
Okay, will do.
So we've got a thing up ahead.
Yes, I saw that.
At 1:49 a.m., the A330 leaves Brazilian radar surveillance and enters a communications dead zone over the mid-Atlantic. Two hours later, an air traffic controller in Senegal tries to contact the flight.
Air France 447, this is Dakar. Do you copy? Come in, Air France 447.
He can't reach the crew, so he alerts Air France.
Dakar for Air France, have you heard from Air 447 over?
Negative. Hold for Air France, please.
No one has heard from the crew of Flight 447. The only communication, 24 maintenance messages transmitted by the plane hours earlier. An Air France maintenance worker tries to make contact, but his message bounces back.
What the hell?
Perhaps the communication system has failed.
HF radio, especially at night, is not terribly reliable. So for some of the time that it was missing, everybody was saying, well, I hope it's just a communication problem.
By the time the plane should have reached French airspace, controllers still can't make contact. At Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, the 11:10 a.m. arrival time comes and goes with no sign of Flight 447. The A330 would have run out of fuel by now. The airline begins notifying families. The plane has almost certainly crashed at sea.
I had an infinitesimally small hope that he might have been on a different plane, because we weren't 100% sure what other flights might be coming back that he could possibly be on.
By the afternoon of June the 1st, the world learns that Flight 447 from Rio to Paris has mysteriously vanished.
It was a real shock to me and the whole industry that a modern aircraft like an Airbus A330, operated by a world-class airline like Air France, could just go missing without a word.
Searchers scramble to the mid-Atlantic to look for the plane and survivors.
The plane had been missing 11 or 12 hours at this stage, without any communication whatsoever.
It's one of the worst accidents in the history of commercial aviation. An advanced passenger jet is gone. 228 people are presumed dead.
Je leur ai dit la vérité, c'est-à-dire que les perspectives de retrouver des...
French President Nicolas Sarkozy announces there's almost no chance anyone survived. The job of solving this mystery falls to the BEA, France's air safety agency. It's under enormous pressure to come up with answers.
We absolutely had to understand why this accident happened, and with that plane and that airline.
Alain Bouillard takes charge of the investigation. He's a pilot and aeronautical engineer with almost 20 years' experience as an air crash investigator.
Ayant fait d'autres enquêtes importantes comme Concorde, j'étais...
I had worked on other important investigations like the Concorde, so I was conscious of the fact that the investigation would be difficult. But I was calm, and I surrounded myself with competent people.
Compétences dans ce domaine.
French systems engineer Léopold Sartorius also joins the team on day one.
From the beginning, we expected a long and complicated investigation.
Okay, we need to contact Brazil and Senegal air traffic control right away, please.
Their first goal, find what's left of Flight 447.
Il avait disparu.
It disappeared from radar without sending a distress signal. And for many days, there was no trace on the surface of the ocean.
This is the last time they sent their position.
Des messages de position envoyés par l'avion toutes les 10 minutes.
Positional messages sent by the plane every 10 minutes allowed us to be sure enough of the zone. A large zone where the plane might be found.
Zone assez large où vous pouvez se trouver l'avion.
Sartorius doesn't know what direction the plane flew after sending that last report. He only knows how fast it was flying. There's a huge area to search.
I say we start here.
Thousands of square kilometers of open water. Air and naval forces scan the ocean looking for any sign of Flight 447. Finally, after 5 days of searching, a Brazilian pilot spots a few scattered pieces of floating debris. Wreckage from an A330. But no survivors. The find erases any lingering doubts about the crash. Everyone aboard Flight 447 is dead.
Your world collapses. It was absolutely horrible. He was a wonderful person. I was very close to him, and it's just, the most horrible thing that you could think of.
The families of 227 others are in the exact same position. They all need answers.
What brings an Airbus down from 35,000 feet?
Nothing.
La perte d'un avion en croisière est toujours...
The loss of an airplane during cruise is always rare.
Nous sommes plus habitués à traiter...
We're more used to events taking place during takeoff or landing, so this event raised a lot of questions.
Donc cet événement appelait beaucoup de questions.
One of the most pressing and disturbing questions. Has the world just witnessed a deadly terrorist attack?
I think a terrorism scenario was thoroughly plausible, very simply because this is a very modern aeroplane with a very good safety record. The easiest explanation is that a bomb blew it out of the sky. That would explain it.
Atlantic currents have spread floating aircraft debris over 500 square kilometers of ocean. Every piece recovered is carefully catalogued, photographed, and sent ashore for analysis. But it's the wreckage lost at the bottom of the sea that investigators need most. Wreckage that includes the vital flight recorders.
If we didn't find the flight recorders, we would never understand what happened.
The two flight recorders capture important details
Air France 447.
Air France 447, go ahead.
of what the pilots say and do during the flight.
Air France 447, contact the Atlantic Center.
The black boxes are so vital, they're equipped with a locator beacon to help investigators find them, even underwater. But the clock is ticking. The beacon can only send a signal for 30 days. What's more, the mid-Atlantic Ocean is 4.5 kilometers deep in some places. Deeper than the remains of the Titanic. Technicians listen for the signal.
At this depth, we need to get right over them.
While crisscrossing a search area of 17,000 square kilometers.
It was an immense area.
Une zone immense. Nous avions engagé une véritable course contre la mort.
It was a real race against time. We only had 30
Dans les
days.
délais de 30 jours.
While the BEA scours the ocean floor for the flight recorders, other team members are scrutinizing the only hard evidence they have so far.
I will pull up all of the messages they sent.
The 24 maintenance messages sent by Flight 447's Aircraft Communication Addressing and Reporting System, ACARS.
This is the first serious accident to a modern airliner where we'd had some ACARS data.
ACARS messages are highly technical. They're not designed to reveal what the crew saw, said, or did during the flight.
On va avoir que des messages de...
To have only the maintenance messages to work with is really unusual. We had parcels of information that gave us, in fact, very little information.
données, en fait, très peu d'informations.
But they do provide an intriguing lead.
Seems this is a problem with the pitot tubes.
One of the maintenance messages notes a failure in the device that measures airspeed, the pitot tube.
C'est vraiment la première pièce.
The ACARS messages had given us the first piece of the puzzle. We knew that there had been a clogging problem in the pitot tubes.
Bouchage de tube pitot.
Pitot tubes are small cylindrical sensors that sit outside the body of the plane. As air rushes through the tubes, they calculate airspeed. But sometimes pitot tubes temporarily fail.
Dans un environnement.
In an environment with very dense ice crystals, all the ice crystals clog the tube and stop the air from entering.
De rentrer à la place.
Air France and other airlines were in the process of replacing pitot tubes to prevent just this kind of problem.
The tubes were freezing all the time.
Annoying, but certainly not dangerous.
A frozen pitot tube is considered far from catastrophic.
If you lose a pitot tube, you don't fall out of the sky.
The pilots knew about the issue and how to respond to it.
La compagnie avait...
The company had notified its pilots with an OSV, an information bulletin, that described the phenomenon and the appropriate measures to take.
conduite à tenir.
Here, look at this.
WEAR concludes that frozen pitot tubes alone cannot explain the crash. There is more to this story.
These messages aren't much help.
Nous avions eu ces certitudes.
We were certain of this right away. We would have to look elsewhere.
Et ailleurs.
While the frozen pitot tubes may not have been to blame, WEAR wonders if extreme weather may have played a role.
De très fortes turbulences.
Strong turbulence can damage a plane or even cause the loss of an aircraft by rupturing a wing or damaging the onboard systems.
La défaillance de système.
Investigators consider the possibility that Flight 447 flew through violent weather strong enough to bring down the plane.
La turbulence était un élément dans
Turbulence might explain what caused the accident.
de l'accident.
Altitude served at 33,000 feet. Maximum thrust.
Even at that altitude, it may have been impossible for the pilots to recover from a stall brought on by a violent storm. The forces could have torn the plane apart.
Sur un avion, le danger principal de la turbulence.
On a plane, the main danger from turbulence is structural breakage, like losing a piece of the tail or losing a wing in an extreme case.
C'est-à-dire à l'extrême,
And that would lead to the loss of the aircraft.
la perte de l'avion.
I need more weather data. pilot reports, satellite images, everything.
Flight 447 disappeared in a volatile region where trade winds from the two hemispheres converge, creating violent storms.
They were in the intertropical convergence zone, which often has very strong turbulence.
Forte turbulence.
Other planes changed their route that night to avoid storms in the area. But what kind of weather did Flight 447 encounter?
Quelles étaient les conditions?
What were the actual conditions? What was the actual environment around this plane? It was a real question.
Véritable question.
Beyond turbulence, thunderstorms pose other threats to aviation. Perhaps lightning was to blame for the crash.
Sir, we're losing all our instruments.
Si toutefois il devait y avoir un défaut d'isolation de l'avion,
If there had been some deficiency in the insulation of the plane and the systems were damaged, we likely would have seen a lot of
plus
problems.
de systèmes que ça n'a été le cas.
Did lightning bring down Flight 447? So far, the only evidence Bouillard has is floating debris, including some unused life jackets, indicating that passengers didn't have time to put them on.
La récupération des gilets de sauvetage dans leur...
Recovering the life jackets in their original packaging told us that the event happened very quickly.
C'était passé de façon très vite.
The passengers weren't ready for the impact with the surface of the water.
Cet impact avec la surface de l'eau.
The unopened life vests hint at a sudden catastrophe. But other debris suggests just the opposite.
The recovery of the tail was a very important element.
Très important.
The pattern of fragmentation can reveal important clues about when the tail broke off.
La nature des ruptures.
All the ruptures were static in nature. There was no trace of fatigue damage.
De fatigue.
This had to happen when it hit the water.
Cet empennage.
The tail was connected to the fuselage at the moment of impact. It didn't come apart in flight.
Rompu en vol.
If the A330 hit the water in one piece, it wasn't brought down by a bomb or by turbulence. Investigators are no closer to solving this mystery. It has been 3 weeks since Flight 447 disappeared into the Atlantic Ocean. In just days, the recorder's battery-powered locator beacons will go dead. With only floating debris to study, specialists pore over a section of Flight 447's galley.
Looks like the pressure was vertical, like this.
They make a key discovery. The plane landed flat and at high speed.
Examining the galley confirmed that there was an enormous vertical acceleration the instant the plane hit the surface of the water.
Everything inside the plane was flattened, like a car in a metal crusher.
They realized that the aeroplane had not nosedived into the sea. It was almost certain that it had belly dropped into the sea. And how that could have happened to a modern airliner, nobody could think of.
Dans ces conditions, retrouver...
Under these circumstances, it was essential to find the recorders to understand the accident and explain why it happened.
Cet accident était arrivé.
The search at sea hits day 30 with no sign of the A330. The locator beacon is presumed dead. Bouillard turns to high-tech sonar to continue the search.
Dorénavant, nous ne pouvions plus utiliser...
From that moment on, sonar was the only way we could detect metal on the ocean floor and have some chance of finding the wreckage.
De localiser l'épave.
But steep underwater mountains and valleys make the ocean floor difficult to scan.
The search area really hadn't been seen before. It was the size of Switzerland, and you were running up through the Alps trying to find this thing. So that's what the terrain looked like, basically, in a general sense. Out to here.
After months of searching, they've scanned more than 22,000 square kilometers of ocean bed and found absolutely nothing.
L'absence d'enregistreur de vol était...
The absence of the flight recorders and wreckage felt very frustrating and like a failure.
De l'enquête technique.
To us, it was inconceivable in 2009, 2010 that we could lose a major airliner and not be able to find it, not be able to understand even remotely what had happened and why 228 people had lost their lives.
Investigators are determined to succeed. They turn to the same automated underwater vehicles that found the Titanic.
It's probably the first time AUVs have been run on that terrain that steep and to look for something this small. You know, it's a big plane when you stand next to it, but when you're searching the ocean, it's a very small target.
Still no sign of any wreckage at the bottom of the sea. It's as if the plane simply disappeared. "18 months after Flight 447 goes missing, WEAR realizes that the odds of finding what he's after are growing slim.
At the end of 2010, we'd already spent 22 million euros.
Continuing the search will cost millions more, with no guarantee of success.
We weren't sure we could find the wreckage. And if we did find the recorders, we weren't sure we'd be able to read them. The black box is not designed to stay in such deep water for 2 years and still function afterwards.
The boxes may have already been crushed by the tremendous underwater pressure. At 4 kilometers below the surface, they're up against a punishing force of over 5,800 pounds per square inch. Investigators may be fighting a losing battle. Nearly 2 years after the Air France disaster, WEAR has little to show for his efforts. No significant wreckage and no black boxes. But he refuses to give up.
We can't stop. We can find the boxes. I know we can.
For the BEA, it was their job to find out what happened, so obviously they wanted to find the black boxes. But can you imagine what it would be like for Airbus not to know for sure what caused this accident, only ever to be able to theorize about it?
Families of the victims are also desperate for answers.
It was extremely important for us that they find the black boxes and find out what happened. And we were determined to put as much pressure as we could on the authorities to ensure that the search continued.
On March the 25th, 2011, the BEA begins one final search. Again, they launch AUVs to scour the ocean floor. They focus on a 37-kilometer wide circle around the plane's last known position.
The AUV is separate from the vessel. So once you launch it, it runs its 20 or 24-hour mission independent of the vessel. If the weather gets rough, the AUV is still tracking back and forth and it doesn't care.
1 week into the search, a submersible captures a sonar image of something huge on the ocean floor. WEAR's gamble may have just paid off.
It sure looks like a plane.
The crew immediately sends down another submersible, this time to take high-resolution digital images.
Never thought I'd see the day.
The crew sends the images straight to Bouillard's office in Paris. 2 years of his life have been devoted to this moment.
I don't believe it. Thank God.
Le moment de l'envoi des photos.
Receiving the photographs was a moment we had waited for 2 years.
2 ans est quelque chose qui
It conjured up indescribable emotions, very strong.
Indescriptible, très fort.
On April the 3rd, 2011, the wreckage of Air France Flight 447 has finally been found. It lies 12 kilometers northeast of the plane's last reported position, at a depth of almost 4,000 meters.
D'avoir déjà
Locating the wreckage was already something exceptional and very significant in the life of an investigator.
With the crash site pinpointed, a second hunt begins. An operator guides a robotic submersible as it peers through the darkness in search of the 2 black boxes.
It's just like a junkyard. It's just nothing but aircraft debris everywhere. Things are on top of each other. There's fuselage skin, there's engines, there's all sorts of things all over the place.
Days pass with no sign of the recorders. Investigators know that even if they find what they're looking for, 2 years underwater may have rendered the devices useless.
We had no idea whether the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder would be in working order.
Then Bouillard gets the break he's been hoping for.
Stop there. Zoom in on that. Absolutely incredible.
tout ça, ce sont des moments
Those are moments that are difficult to describe. Moments in your career that you can't forget.
dans notre carrière.
An unmanned sub first recovers the flight data recorder, then the cockpit voice recorder.
Once it's on deck, the gendarmerie take it and they put it in the box and secure it. Up then, everybody's like holding their breath. And at that point, you know you have it. So it's really a tremendous feeling.
French gendarmes escort the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder to Leos Sartorius' lab in Paris. After countless hours of searching and theorizing, the world may finally understand what happened on board Flight 447. The answer to what went wrong may be locked in these watertight containers.
Le souci majeur, c'était
There was a lot of concern that we might take a false step that would lead to the loss of the information.
des informations.
They must be handled with great care. One wrong move and a 2-year search costing almost 32 million euros will have been for nothing. Starting with the cockpit voice recorder, they carefully open the protective casing, looking for the memory card inside.
The worst thing would have been for the actual memory cards to be broken, physically broken.
This isn't good. See the damage? Transmitters look broken.
We quickly noticed that there were small parts that were broken, so we weren't sure that everything was in working order.
If technicians can't fix the broken CVR, there may be no way to know what was going on in the cockpit just before the crash, or even who was flying the plane.
Yeah, look at the FDR count.
A close examination of the second box, the flight data recorder, brings better news.
It's fine. No problems.
I think we all looked at each other and said, it's incredible that they're in this state. It's incredible. The memory card was in excellent condition. We were able to read the data very quickly.
While technicians try to repair the cockpit voice recorder, Sartorius carefully plots the flight recorder data.
We're cruising safely at 35,000 feet.
The FDR data reveals that the pitot tubes did in fact freeze.
The pitot tubes freeze here.
The frozen tubes produce erratic airspeed readings, causing the autopilot to shut off automatically.
Autopilot shuts off. The pilot takes control of the plane.
It warns the pilots very loudly. That can be a bit of a surprise, a bit of a shock. And it definitely was a shock to these pilots. And it was their reaction to this warning which was the key to everything else that followed.
The crew has been taught that a frozen pitot tube should clear itself in less than a minute.
The pitos on the aircraft, they were only subject to the clogging for about 56 seconds. And after that, the airspeed readings were back to normal again.
The pilot only needs to hold the plane steady and the problem will disappear.
The airplane doesn't know that you don't know the airspeed. All the airplane wants is power to keep it going forward and the same attitude to keep it in level flight.
But he does not hold steady.
Whoever was flying the plane pulled back and pitched the nose up instead.
Il a paru à la déconnexion du pilote automatique.
When the autopilot disconnected, the pilot in command changed the pitch of the plane.
Le pilote en fonction.
He climbs more than 2,500 feet.
If you pull the nose of an airplane up, it's going uphill, it's going to slow down.
Here, their speed dropped more than 90 knots in less than a minute. This triggered a stall warning here.
Cette situation,
raising the nose of the plane at high altitude put the plane into a stall very quickly.
Dans une situation de décrochage.
In an aerodynamic stall, the wings lose lift and the plane drops from the sky.
C'est les actions des pilotes.
It was the pilot's actions that led to the stall.
They fell at more than 12,000 feet per minute.
Inexplicably, the pilot continued to pull back when he should have been pitching the plane's nose down to gain speed and lift.
The more you raise the nose, the more the lift will be destroyed. And that's what was happening to Air France 447.
We had a plane that was practically falling like a rock.
Only the cockpit voice recorder can reveal why the pilots acted as they did.
In our laboratory, there were a few hours of agony because we weren't sure we could read the data after all this effort, all this money spent.
Will it play?
Don't know.
Investigators are up against the wall. They have just one hope remaining in their long quest to know what caused the worst disaster in Air France's history. Everything they've worked for now depends on repairs made to one small electronic device.
The moment of truth.
Air France 447, go ahead.
Air France 447, contact commanding center.
Atlantico, Atlantico.
40 minutes before the accident, Captain Dubois is in his seat.
Air France 447, position.
The CVR allowed us to understand who was piloting the planes, who was monitoring the parameters.
Maintain flight level 350.
Okay, will do.
First Officer Pierre-Cédric Bonin is in the right-hand seat.
So we've got a thing up ahead?
Yes, I saw that.
And the two men are heading towards a storm.
Looks like we're entering the cloud.
Normally, the crew would try to fly above a storm. But at this stage in the transatlantic flight, it's not safe to do that.
It would be good if we can climb now, eh?
Yeah.
At 35,000 feet, the air outside is too thin for the fuel-heavy plane to climb any higher. The pilots have only two choices: fly straight through the storm, or try to navigate around it.
You get some sleep?
So. Well then, I am out of here.
Captain Dubois takes his scheduled rest.
First Officer David Robert relieves the more experienced captain. Robert has almost 4,000 hours more flying the A330 than the other first officer on the flight deck.
First Officer Robert is in the left-hand seat. First Officer Bonin is the pilot flying in the right-hand seat.
Investigators now know that minutes before the crash, the captain left the cockpit for his break.
So you maybe want to go to the left of it?
But it's unclear which of the two remaining pilots is in command.
Excuse me? Can you possibly go a bit to the left?
The way they acted when the captain had left the flight deck was not as if one of them was definitely in charge and the other one was definitely the supporting pilot.
The confusion over their roles becomes critical when the plane hits a column of ice crystals in the cloud. The ice crystals pound the plane. Ice envelops the pitot tubes.
The ice crystals are filling the pitot tubes. Airspeed readings are no longer valid.
Suddenly, the pilots can't be sure how fast they're flying.
That is the autopilot disconnecting.
I have the controls.
Stall warnings begin to blare in the cockpit as Bonin lifts the nose. Finally, investigators know which pilot put the plane into a stall.
First Officer Bonin is pulling back and stalling the plane.
Incredibly, neither pilot can figure out why the warning is sounding.
Officer Robert doesn't understand what's happening.
He sees the airplane going up and he sees the airspeed dropping. And he says, hey, what's your airspeed?
We lost the speed.
The pilots need to push the plane's nose down to gain speed. But Bonin inexplicably is pulling back, lifting the nose.
Okay. I'm going back down. I can't be 2 or 3 are going up, so go back down.
The pilots struggle to regain control of their plane. But they seem completely paralyzed by their own confusion.
They're doing everything wrong. It should be obvious what to do.
Desperate to save his 216 passengers, First Officer David Robert summons the captain. Bonin increases thrusts to maximum power, but it's no use.
Do you understand what's happening?
I'm losing all control of the plane.
When they get here, they are falling at more than 60 to 100 feet per minute.
So they still have about 2 minutes left to figure out what's happening.
First Officer Robert decides to take control.
Controls to the left.
He tries to push the nose of the plane down, a key step for recovering from a stall. But incredibly, Bonin is still pulling back on his controls.
They can use their side sticks at the same time. If both go in different directions, they have a tendency to cancel each other out.
The fact that the two pilots were making different and sometimes opposite inputs to the side stick controls was pretty surprising. The two pilots were not coordinating their thinking or their actions.
90 seconds after the crisis began, the captain returns.
What the hell are you doing? We've lost all control here, and we don't understand anything, and we've tried everything.
Because they weren't believing the situation that they were now in, they just went back to basic instinct, which is, I want to go up, I want to stop falling, let's pull the nose up.
Dubois scans the instruments, trying to see what's gone wrong.
What do you think? What do we need to do?
I don't know, it's going down.
The captain doesn't have enough time to assess the situation.
Well, we're at 9,000 feet. Climb. But I've been at maximum nose up for a while.
Finally, Dubois understands. First Officer Bonin is causing the stall by pulling the nose up.
No, don't climb.
By the time they figure it out, it's too late.
Robert can't get enough lift to recover from the stall. At 2,000 feet, sensors detect the ocean's surface and trigger new alarms.
We're going to crash. This can't be true. Look at what's happening!
The aircraft hits the water at almost 200 kilometers an hour.
La première écoute de l'enregistreur de conversation.
Hearing the conversations on the cockpit voice recorder for the first time was a big moment. It left us speechless.
Nous a laissé sans voix.
Alan Bouillard was all pale. At that moment, he understood the distress the crew was in during the last moments of the flight.
By the summer of 2011, salvage crews recover 104 bodies from the submerged wreckage of Flight 447, including that of Brad Clemes.
My brother was amongst those that were raised, so it enabled us to recover him, to bring him home and to conduct the service properly and to say our goodbyes properly, so it helped.
More than 3 years after the accident, Alain Bouillard announces that the downing of Flight 447 was not caused by the frozen pitot tubes, but by the crew's failure to understand and rectify the situation.
This can't be true. Well, what's happening?
There was a feeling that these planes were so sophisticated they could fly by themselves. The pilots weren't even trained to fly this type of plane on manual at high altitudes because the thought was that they would always be on autopilot, so there was no reason for the pilot to know how to fly it.
New training is now in place to teach crews how to deal with unreliable airspeed and how to recover from a stall at high altitudes.
The airlines have to be prepared to spend more money on fundamental manual flying training and cognition training for their pilots. Air France 447 is just the accident where you can't ignore it any longer, and changes have to come.